Welcome to this tutorial for Biology Paper 2, 2020 revisions. So basically, in this tutorial, we're just going to answer one of the questions which came in the school certificate students 2020. So the question was gotten from neurons. So the question reads, Figure 4 shows the structure of two neurons. So these neurons were displayed there, and some parts were labeled with P and Q. And then the first question was to identify the two neurons shown in figure 4. So basically here what was needed is for a student to identify neuron 1 as well as neuron 2. Okay, so now what is neuron 1 and neuron 2? So the thing is, for you to know neuron 1 and neuron 2, you need to have knowledge about three types of neurons. We have sensory neuron, we have motor neuron, and we have the relay neuron. Okay, so now you need to know some differentiating features or structures that differentiates motor neuron, sensory neuron, as well as interneuron or relay neuron. So now, before we even give verdict to this question, we are going to look at different types of neurons, three different types of neurons, and then come back to tackle this question. So we have these three types of neurons here. We have the sensory neuron, we have the relay neuron, as well as motor neuron. So now we should basically focus on some specific structures. How is motor different from relay, and how is it different from the sensor? So this sensory neuron is the one which is located near the receptor cells, where it's there to get the information and send it to the central nervous system. We are talking about the brain and the spinal cord for interpretation, which is relayed by the relay neuron or interneuron, so that it can be that electrical impulse or information can be sent to the motor neuron, and eventually it can be sent to the effector muscles. So the first thing we must know is we need to look at the cell body. Okay, so how is the cell body located in these different types of neurons? So when you look at the cell body that I'm talking about, is this the cell body, as well as here we have the cell body, even here we have the cell body. So the cell body usually in the sensory neuron, it is just it's outside, it's just along the root ganglion, as you can see here. It's here along the axon. Okay, but when you look at the relay neuron, the cell body as well as the motor neuron, the cell body is in the spinal cord and the brain, which is the central nervous system, as you can see there. Okay, so this cell body can differentiate which one is relay, which one is motor, and which one is sensor. But for relay and motor, both these of cell bodies are located within the brain. But for the sensory one, it's just along the root ganglion, as you can see here. And usually when you look at the dendrites, these dendrites are the ones which could collect neighboring impulses. So when you look at it, the motor neuron has a number of it, same with relay neuron. But for the sensory neuron, it usually don't have a lot of it. Okay, and when you look at them, motor neuron is expected to have a longer axon, same with relay neuron. But for sensory neuron, it is usually short. Looking at those few parameters that we've seen, now let's go back and answer that question. And answer this question, which is identify the two neurons shown in figure 4. So we have neuron 1. What do you think is neuron 1? Looking at this neuron 1, as you can see, these are effector organs, let's say the muscles. So basically, this one is going to be the motor neuron. And then when you look at neuron 2, you find that when you look at it, it doesn't have the was specifically a well-defined cell body within the axon terminal. It is there in the central nervous system whereby it's aggregated. So this one cannot be a sensory neuron. It is basically the relay neuron, also known as the interneuron. So the neuron 1 is motor neuron, neuron 2 is relay neuron. Let me write that down. So neuron 1 is it's the motor neuron. Then 2 is the relay neuron. Okay. Having answered that one, let's go to question 2, which is saying state the functions of parts P and Q in neuron 1. So we want to identify the parts, which is we have P here and Q. So what is part P and Q? The part P here, as you can see, it's a dendrite, okay? And Q here is an axon. So basically we just asked what's the function of the dendrite and what's the function of the axon. So as you can see here, dendrites are they are cells which collect neighboring nerve impulse. However, for the Q1, Q is an axon. Okay, let me write them. So P is a dendrite, and then Q is an axon. So what's the function of a dendrite and axon? So let's look at that. Like I've said, dendrite collects nerve impulse from the neighboring neurons. Axon terminal transmit electrical impulse within the what? Within the neuron. Okay, for a better and easy referencing, so we have the dendrites which receive nerve impulses from other neurons and carry them towards the cell body. So their role is to receive nerve impulses from other neurons. In other words, I said collect nerve impulse from other neurons. And then how about the axon? It carries nerve impulse away from the cell body to other neurons or effectors. Okay? So in other words, you can say it transmits nerve impulses within a neuron. Then that is correct. So we can go back to question that is answered. 2 is answered. We go to B now. The B says, what do you understand by the term reflex action? What do you understand by the term reflex action? Okay, so basically what we mean by reflex action, a reflex action is a rapid automatic response that a human can give unconsciously. Okay, this is what we define reflex action. Okay, immediately, let's say you touch something sharp, or maybe let's say you've touched fire. You are going to remove the hand as rapid as possible without even without you thinking about it. It doesn't need you to make a decision that now I need to remove my hand. Okay? Even if you are not looking at the fire, but for as long as you feel that impact or stimulus, you can withdraw your hand. That's a reflex action. Okay? And then B2 is saying, give one example of a reflex action. So a reflex action, like the example I gave, withdrawing the hand from a sharp, or maybe from a needle, or maybe let's say withdrawing a hand from fire. In some instances where even when kind of dirty stuff has entered your eye, there is that reflex action whereby tears starts dropping. Those are some of the examples on the reflex action. So just to strengthen your understanding on reflex action and the examples of a reflex action, let's look at the diagram which represents reflex action. So when you look at reflex action, a reflex action is an automatic, rapid, and involuntary response of the body to a stimulus, which does not involve conscious thought. Okay, meaning that you are not going to think about it. Automatic, meaning it happens without control. Rapid, it is so fast. Involuntary, meaning it is without human control, okay, of the body to a stimulus. A stimulus could be anything, fire, sharp object, anything, okay, and it is not going to involve your mind. You are not going to be, your mind is not going to be totally decisive at that particular time. So it's very much important that it protects the body from harm, okay. So one of the example that might be needed as this is the answer to that question, mind you, so take note of it. An example you can give is putting your hand away when you touch a hot object. That's an example. I gave another example, tears dropping whenever any hazardous stimulus has entered your your eye. Okay, so that's it about reflex action and an example. So now let's go to the last question. The last question says, describe the path taken by an impulse from the receptor to the effectors. Describe the path taken by an impulse from the receptors to the effectors. So this is 2 marks. They want you to give the description of how an impulse moves. Let's say we describe that this is what's the reflex action, right? So what this question is requiring is you to explain how a person is going to, let's say they will sense that they are touching fire, and then they withdraw from it within, even though it happens within milliseconds, but there are a lot of things that are involved. So let's look at it. We call it the reflex arc. So what's the reflex arc? Okay, what's the reflex arc? So the reflex arc we are looking at is the sequence of a reflex. How does it happen? So what happens is that receptor detects the stimulus. So receptors are located. Let's look at the hand when you're talking about the hand. Receptors are located, the nerve ending receptors are located on your hands. And then what happens is that after those receptors have detected the stimulus, let's say heat or pain, they have sensed that, okay, the hand is in pain. Then the sensory neuron carries the impulse to the spinal cord. Spinal cord is in the central nervous system, okay, which is the brain and the spinal cord. They are just in close proximity. So now when we come to, after this information has been sent to the spinal cord, what happens is that a delay neuron is going to intervene. This interneuron or delay neuron in the spinal cord processes the information, okay? More like it passes the information from central nervous system to the motor neuron. And then what happens is that motor neuron carries the impulse from the spinal cord to the effect, okay? So this motor neuron will carry the impulse from the spinal cord to the effect. So this effect now, it could be a muscle, it could be a gland, it could be anything, okay? And then that will make you now withdraw the hand. Let's look at it. So look at this is a stimulus, a hot stimulus. You touch it, receptors detect it. Receptors are more like my sensors to know that there is fire here. Then it will send it to the central nervous system, and then after sending to the central nervous system, the interneuron here is going to relay the information to the after the information have been this information is going to be relayed by interneuron. Then after the spinal cord has responded, then the information now is going to be gotten by the motor neuron. The motor neuron is the one now in green. Okay, this is the motor neuron. This motor neuron is connected to an effector organ like the muscle. So after this pain has been translated by the brain, by the spinal cord, that's why now it's going to go to the muscles, and then the muscle is going to react involuntarily. That's why you've seen that it has moved from here to here, and this we call it action. It was here, but within a short period of time, you move it here. And this is what basically happens when we describe the reflex act. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe.